Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening up a file that, I have to be honest, it kind of blew my mind when I first started digging into the source material.
It's one of those, isn't it?
It really is. It's a topic that is just hiding in plain sight. It's something you probably encounter, 5, 10, maybe 20 times a day?
Oh, at least.
On your phone, on your TV, maybe even, when you're sitting in a movie theater waiting for the previews to end. But you probably never stop to look at the price tag attached to it.
And more importantly, you rarely stop to look at who is actually signing the check for that price tag.
Exactly.
Because usually when we see an ad, we just assume, okay, it's a company. They're trying to sell us a shoe or a car or another streaming service we don't need.
Right. But today, we aren't talking about Nike or Netflix. Well, actually, we are going to talk about Netflix a bit later, but in a very, very different context.
A very different context.
Today, we're talking about the federal government. But not the government as, a lawmaking body or a regulator or the people who collect your taxes.
Yeah.
We are talking about the federal government as a massive global marketing machine.
It's a brand.
It's a huge brand. I was reading through this oversight report from an organization called Open the Books, which, by the way, fantastic name.
Perfect name for what they do.
It is. And my jaw just about hit the floor on the very first page.
It's a startling document, for sure.
It really is. They lead with this one statistic that it perfectly sets the tone for everything we're going to discuss today.
Oh.
The report states that if the U.S. federal government were a private company, it would be the second largest public relations firm in the entire world.
Just let that sink in for a second.
Unbelievable.
The second largest, second only to a company called WPP, which is this massive global conglomerate that owns dozens and dozens of ad agencies.
Right.
We tend to think of PR firms as these, glossy Manhattan offices representing celebrities or maybe some tech giant in Silicon Valley.
Sure.
But the reality is the federal government has an infrastructure of persuasion that rivals, and in many specific sectors, actually exceeds the biggest corporate advertising giants on the planet.
It is absolutely massive, and we are going to break down the numbers today because they're eye-watering.
They really are.
We are talking about federal agencies spending approximately $1.5 billion annually on advertising and public relations.
And that's just the average. I think that's a key point to underline here.
That's the baseline.
It's the baseline. If you look at the last decade, the scope is even more impressive. From fiscal year 2014 to 2023, the total spend is nearly $15 billion.
$15 billion.
With a B. And that is taxpayer money. That is money that came directly out of your paycheck, went to the IRS, and was then funneled right back out into ad buys, PR contracts, and media campaigns.
And that really brings us to the core question we need to wrestle with today. This isn't just about accounting, right?
No, it's philosophical.
It is. It's about the relationship between the state and the citizen. When the government takes tax dollars and then spends them to talk back to the taxpayer, to message us, to nudge us, to persuade us, what is that?
Right.
Is it public education? Is that just helpful information? Or is it, to use a really loaded word, propaganda?
It is the ultimate gray area. And what makes this deep dive so critical, I think, right now, is that the rules of the game have fundamentally changed.
How so?
Well, for a long, long time, there was actually a law on the books, a literal legal firewall that prevented the government from showing certain types of content to Americans.
Okay.
It was actually illegal for them to target us here at home with the same messaging they were using overseas to influence foreign populations.
But I'm sensing a but here.
Yeah.
That firewall isn't there anymore, is it?
It has essentially burned down, yes.
Wow.
So what you have now is this perfect storm. You have massive, massive budgets. You have a repealed ban on domestic propaganda, and you have this major shift toward what we might call Hollywood-style storytelling.
Okay, so we have a huge roadmap ahead of us today. We are going to open the ledger and look at who is spending this money. And spoiler alert, the Pentagon is a massive player here.
The biggest.
We're going to look at that legal shift, the Smith-Mundt Act, which sounds really dry, but it's actually the key to understanding modern media.
And everything.
We're going to look at how political figures are pivoting to Netflix and documentaries to kind of bypass traditional news entirely.
A direct channel to the public.
And finally, we have to talk about the transparency black hole, because a disturbing amount of this money just seems to disappear into a line item called unspecified digital media.
It creates a fascinating and I think a somewhat concerning imbalance of power.
How so?
You have the state with a billion-dollar megaphone, and then you have the average citizen, just trying to make their voice heard in that storm.
Okay, so let's do it. Let's open the ledger. Section 1, who is spending what and why? You mentioned that $1.5 billion annual average. That is a lot of zeros. So when we peel back the layers of the federal budget, where is that cash actually going?
Well, when you dig into the breakdown, there is one agency that consistently, year over year, just sits at the very top of the pile. It is the heavyweight champion of federal advertising.
And that is?
The Department of Defense.
The Pentagon, of course.
Consistently the highest spender. In 2023 alone, they obligated $1.14 billion toward advertising and public relations.
$1.14 billion. With a B.
With a B.
So the vast majority of that annual average we talked about is just the military.
A huge, huge chunk of it, yes. And it gets even more granular. Within the DoD, the Army is the biggest individual spender.
The Army specifically.
The Army specifically. In 2023, the Army alone spent nearly $640 million on advertising.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because when I think of the Army, I think of, tanks, logistics, training, national defense. Why does the Army need a marketing budget that rivals Coca-Cola? I have to assume this is primarily about recruitment.
That is the primary driver, absolutely. We have to remember the context here. The United States has an all-volunteer force.
Right, no draft.
There is no draft. That means the military cannot compel people to serve. They have to convince them. They have to constantly sell the idea of service to the next generation.
So they're a company competing for talent.
Exactly. They are competing for talent just like a tech company or a university or a trade school. They're all fishing in the same pond of 18 to 24-year-olds.
So when we see those slick commercials during Sunday Night Football, where you see the banners on websites, be all you can be, that's all part of this $640 million.
That's it. And it's gotten so much more sophisticated than just a TV spot. I mean, they have esports teams now.
The Army has an esports team.
A very successful one. They sponsor video game tournaments. They have massive targeted social media campaigns on TikTok and Instagram. They are meeting the demographic young men and women where they live, which is increasingly online and in these gaming spaces.
It's incredible. But is it just about getting them to, click the sign up here link, or is it something a little deeper, a little more subtle?
It's both. The immediate goal is leads, getting names for recruiters. But the long-term goal is image management. It's about maintaining the brand of the military.
The brand.
As a desirable career path, as a respected institution, as a force for good. If the brand perception drops, recruitment numbers drop. It's a direct correlation. So that spending is essentially brand insurance.
It's just fascinating to think of the U.S. Army as a brand that needs managing, just like Apple or Disney.
But it does. And they aren't the only ones.
Okay, so who else is spending big? Who's number 2?
Well, the number 2 spot often fluctuates, and it really depends on what is happening in the field at that moment.
A crisis, for instance.
Exactly. But recently, the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, has been a massive spender.
That makes perfect sense, given the last few years. I imagine the pandemic skewed those numbers wildly.
It did, in a huge way. In 2022, so at the height of the public health campaigns, HHS spending peaked at $453.6 million.
Almost $500 million.
But if you zoom out and look at the total advertising obligations across the entire government related specifically to COVID-19, it was about $1.1 billion.
$1 billion just on COVID.
Just on COVID. And HHS was responsible for about 79% of that total.
Wow. And this is really where that debate we mentioned earlier, the education versus propaganda line, starts to get really blurry, isn't it?
It's the perfect test case. On one hand, you have a global public health crisis. You absolutely need to tell people where to get tested, where to get vaccinated, what the symptoms are, how to protect themselves.
That seems like a completely valid use of government funds. That is public education in its purest form.
I think most people would agree with that.
Wash your hands, stay 6 feet apart. That's just utility. It's helpful.
But on the other hand, critics would argue that some of that spending was also used to manage the narrative around the administration's handling of the crisis. When does here's where to get the shot turn into the government is doing a great job distributing the shot? It's a very fine line.
And a very important one.
And now that we are past the peak of the pandemic, what happened to that spending? It dropped right back down. HHS spending is now around $120 million in 2023.
Which is still a significant chunk of change, but it's a huge drop from that sort of wartime footing.
Absolutely. And then you have the third big spender, which is the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. They spent about $88.2 million in 2023.
Okay, what are they selling? They don't have a product, really. They don't recruit in the same way the Army does.
Here, some might say.
Oops.
Or preparedness, if you want to be more charitable. This is
Yeah.
the See Something, Say Something campaign. It's ready.gov. It's disaster preparedness. It's messaging designed to keep the public vigilant against terrorism or natural disasters.
You know, it's funny you say that. See something, say something is one of those phrases that is so embedded in our culture now, I completely forget it's a marketing slogan.
It is.
Just feels like a rule of life.
Yeah.
Like, look both ways before you cross the street.
And that's the sign of a truly successful PR campaign. When the slogan becomes part of the vernacular, when it feels like common sense, DHS is essentially marketing a state of mind.
A state of constant awareness.
It's a state of constant awareness. But here's the thing that really struck me in the report, and this goes beyond just the ad buys. We're focusing on the money paid to TV networks or to Facebook.
Right, the external spending.
But there is a shadow army behind the scenes.
The shadow army. That sounds very cloak and dagger.
It's not a literal army, and it's not really a secret, but it is a massive workforce that operates largely unnoticed by the public. The government employs over 3,000 public affairs officers, or PAOs.
3,000 people.
And their entire job, full-time, is public relations.
So these aren't outside ad agencies they contract with. These are civil servants.
Correct. They are on the GS pay scale. They are career government employees, and they are not cheap. Between 2007 and 2014, the report tracked salaries totaling $2.3 billion flowing just to these officers.
$2.3 billion just in salary.
Just in salaries. And the trend line is going up. The number of these PR positions in the government increased by 15% in that same period.
So let me get this straight. Regardless of who is in the White House, Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There is this permanent infrastructure of thousands of people whose sole job is to spin the government's actions.
That's a blunt way to put it, but yes, it creates a permanent infrastructure of persuasion within the civil service. Presidents come and go, political appointees change.
But the PAOs remain.
The PAOs remain. They are the ones writing the press releases, managing the official social media accounts, talking to reporters off the record, ghostwriting op-eds for agency heads. They are the gatekeepers of the government's image.
It really reframes how you think about government news, doesn't it?
Completely.
It's not just some dry reporting of facts. It's a curated product. It's produced by thousands of professionals who are paid with your tax dollars to make their specific agency look good.
And for a long time, there were very strict rules about who that product could target.
Which brings us to the legal side of this.
Which brings us to Section 2, the legal turn.
Yes, the Smith-Mundt Act. This is one of those things that sounds like boring legalese from a history book, but when you understand the history and what happened to it, it's actually kind of terrifying.
It's the whole ball game.
So walk us through this. 1948. What's the world look like?
The year is 1948. We are in the very early days of the Cold War. The U.S. government is deeply worried about Soviet propaganda, about communism spreading around the world.
The Red Scare.
Exactly. So they passed the Smith-Mundt Act, and what this did was authorize the State Department and the USIA, the United States Information Agency, to broadcast pro-U.S. content to foreign audiences.
Okay, so this is the birth of Voice of America, Radio Free Europe.
That's it. Broadcasting American jazz and news and democratic ideals behind the Iron Curtain.
The idea was to win hearts and minds abroad.
Precisely. The goal was to influence people outside the United States. But, and this is the crucial part, Congress was very, very wary of this new power.
Why?
They looked at what happened in Nazi Germany with state propaganda. They looked at the Soviet Union's media machine, and they said, we do not want the U.S. government to have a propaganda tool that can be turned inward on its own people.
They didn't want the State Department brainwashing Americans.
They were terrified of it, so they put in a ban.
A ban on what, exactly?
They included a strict domestic dissemination ban. This meant the government was legally prohibited from targeting its own citizens with this specific type of content. It created a firewall.
So give me an example. If Voice of America produced a documentary about how great American democracy is.
They could broadcast it to Poland, but they literally could not broadcast it to Iowa. It was illegal.
Because they feared it would become a state propaganda machine.
Precisely. They wanted to protect the marketplace of ideas, here in the U.S. from being flooded and dominated by government-funded speech. They wanted independent media, a free press, to be the primary source of information for Americans.
And that firewall stood for, what, over 60 years?
It did, for decades. But then came 2013.
And what happened in 2013?
The Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. And it wasn't a standalone bill that got a big debate. It was tucked inside the massive National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA.
The big military funding bill that passes every year.
The one that always passes. So it didn't get a lot of public scrutiny.
And what did this Modernization Act do?
It effectively abolished the domestic ban.
It just got rid of it.
It burned down the firewall.
So why? What was the justification for doing that?
Well, to be fair, the proponents of this change, and it was a bipartisan effort, they argued that the original ban was obsolete.
Obsolete.
Their main argument was the internet. They said, look, we live in a digital age. You can't geofence information anymore. If we put something online for people in Russia to see, people in Chicago can access it with a click. We can't stop the signal.
That seems like a pretty logical argument on its face. The internet has no borders.
It's a reasonable point. And they also argued it was about transparency. They said Americans should be able to see and hear what their government is telling the rest of the world. Why should it be a secret?
Okay, another fair point. But I'm guessing the critics didn't see it that way.
Not at all. Opponents, like Representative Thomas Massie and others, have been very vocal about this from the beginning. They argue that repealing the ban opened the door for taxpayer-funded fake news.
That's a strong phrase.
They worry it legalized domestic influence campaigns.
Because now the government can legally use those same sophisticated psychological tools and media strategies that were designed to, topple foreign dictators or counter-terrorist ideologies.
And aim them at us. At American citizens.
That's a chilling thought.
And that brings us to this concept from the academic literature on modern propaganda. It's called the fire hose of falsehood.
The fire hose of falsehood.
It's the idea that modern propaganda works by overwhelming you from a high number of channels with a high volume of messages. And the Modernization Act allows the government to use a high number of channels to disseminate its information domestically.
The risk being that without that clear ban, the government's messaging just becomes indistinguishable from independent news.
It just blends in. If I'm scrolling through my feed, I might not realize that the slickly produced video I'm watching about a policy success was actually produced by the State Department.
Has this actually happened? Are there real-world examples of this getting messy?
There are. The sources point to a specific incident with Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty in July of 2018.
Okay, what happened there?
So this is a network that falls under the USAGM, the U.S. Agency for Global Media. Historically, their whole mission is to broadcast to places like Russia and Iran.
Right, foreign audiences.
But in 2018, they bought Facebook ads. And they didn't target people in Moscow or Tehran. They specifically targeted Americans.
They bought ads to show to U.S. citizens what on earth was in the ads.
The ads were critical of certain NATO members. And this aligned perfectly with the administration's rhetoric at the time, which was very publicly critical of NATO partners not paying their fair share of defense spending.
Okay, hold on. So you have a government-funded media outlet originally designed to broadcast to foreign countries, using tax dollars to buy ads on Facebook, targeting Americans, with a political message that just happens to support the current president's foreign policy.
That is exactly what happened.
Wow.
And the implication is huge, because this appears to violate even the modernized rules. Theoretically, the law still prohibits these agencies from actively developing audiences in the U.S.
So they can make the content available, but they aren't supposed to market it to us.
That's the supposed line. But in the age of algorithmic targeting and paid promotion on social media, where do you draw that line? Is buying a Facebook ad making it available, or is it developing an audience?
It seems like a line that is very, very easy to cross and almost impossible to police.
Oversight is incredibly difficult. Once that content is in the digital ecosystem, it just flows everywhere. And because the source isn't always clearly labeled, it just blends in with everything else you see.
This leads us right into the next big area, Section 3, the blurred lines.
Yeah.
Because not all this is nefarious, right?
Absolutely not.
We need the government to tell us things sometimes. It's a necessary function.
Correct. We have to be nuanced here. We can distinguish between what is necessary public information and what we might call brand management.
Okay, so give me the necessary bucket. What are some clear-cut examples of good government communication?
The CDC warning about a Zika outbreak. The Department of Transportation running a campaign against distracted driving. The Department of Education reminding students about FAFSA deadlines.
Functional stuff.
It's functional. It serves a clear public utility. I don't think anyone seriously argues that the government shouldn't tell us if a bridge is out or a hurricane is coming.
Right. I definitely want to know if a hurricane is coming.
Me too. But then you have the other bucket, questionable use, or as the source material puts it, brand protection.
And the case study they use here is fascinating. Apple versus the FBI.
The San Bernardino case, yes, the locked iPhone.
Right. Most people remember that as this huge debate about privacy versus security.
And it was.
Could the government force Apple to create a back door to unlock a terrorist's phone? But the sources we looked at describe it differently. They describe it as a PR battle between two massive brands.
Which is a fascinating lens.
Apple is obviously a brand. We get that.
But the Department of Justice and the FBI are brands too. And the analysis in the source material suggests the FBI wasn't just acting as law enforcement. It was actively protecting its brand name and its business model, which is national security.
They were fighting a legal battle in court, but they were also fighting a PR campaign in the court of public opinion.
Exactly. And look at the tactics they used. They used testimonials, right?
From the victims' families.
They used powerful emotional appeals. They put the families in the spotlight to talk about their grief and their need for answers. They effectively ran a full-scale PR campaign to sway public opinion on the issue of encryption.
And when the government does that, when it uses its immense resources to win a policy argument against a private company, is that public education?
Or is that the state putting its thumb on the scale of public debate? It's a very powerful question.
It is. And there's this term from one of the legal notes we reviewed that I just can't get out of my head, apple pie propaganda.
It's a great phrase.
It's a brilliant phrase, but I hate what it implies. What does it mean?
It's a crucial concept for understanding how this works today. Modern propaganda, effective propaganda, isn't usually blatant lies. It's not a dictator shouting on a balcony that 2 + 2 = 5. Apple pie propaganda is content that is, and I'm quoting here, by and large, truthful and accurate.
So it's true. What's the problem?
The problem is that it gently guides a viewer to adopt a particular point of view by painting an incomplete picture.
So it's about what they leave out.
Precisely. It omits the messy parts. It highlights the success and it hides the failure. It tells a truth, but not the whole truth. And the real kicker, the thing that makes it so effective, is attribution.
Meaning knowing who sent the message.
Right. A lot of this content is not clearly attributed as government-sourced when it finally reaches you, the viewer. Think about a classic tool called video news releases, or VNRs.
Explain those for our listeners who might not be familiar.
Sure. A federal agency, say the Department of Agriculture, might produce a prepackaged news segment. It looks exactly like a local news report. It sounds like a local news report. It has a narrator who sounds like a journalist.
So it looks totally legit.
Totally. They send this pre-made segment out to hundreds of local TV stations across the country for free. If that station is understaffed or on a tight deadline, they might just run it during their evening newscast.
And if they run it without saying, this story was produced by the Department of Agriculture,
then the viewer at home thinks they're watching independent journalism, but they are actually watching a government press release crafted by those PAOs we talked about.
that is incredibly deceptive.
It is truthful but incomplete. It's apple pie propaganda. And it is so effective because it bypasses our natural skepticism of politicians and official government statements. We trust our local news anchor.
And this seems to be evolving. We're seeing this evolution from 30-second ads or these little news clips to something much, much bigger. Which brings us to Section 4, the new frontier.
Hollywood and the influence industry.
This is where it gets really, really interesting. We are moving from cinematic statecraft, being about old John Wayne war movies, to, full-length entertainment on our streaming platforms.
A completely different level of integration into culture.
And we have to start by talking about the Obamas.
We do. After leaving the White House, Barack and Michelle Obama founded a production company called Higher Ground Productions. And they signed a massive multi-year partnership with Netflix.
And they aren't just making, rom-coms or nature documentaries.
Well, they are making a wide range of content, to be fair. But look at the flagship titles. American Factory, which won an Academy Award, it deals directly with labor rights, globalization, and the hollowing out of the American Midwest.
Deeply political themes.
Very. Then there's Crip Camp, a celebrated documentary about the disability rights movement. And more recently, The G Word, which is a whole series based on Michael Lewis's book, The Fifth Risk, which is all about the importance of the federal bureaucracy and the dangers of government deconstruction.
These aren't just stories. These are arguments. They're making a case.
They are. And the sources we read describe this strategy as bypassing traditional media.
What does that mean?
Well, if an ex-president gives a speech on CNN, he reaches the political junkies, the people who are already paying attention.
Right. The bubble.
The bubble. But if he produces a hit documentary on Netflix that millions of people watch on a Friday night, he reaches the cultural vein. He's speaking directly to people who might never, ever tune in to C-SPAN.
It's soft power, a term usually used for foreign policy, but turned inward on the domestic population.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's using the tools of culture and entertainment to shape the national narrative. And you can see it in their upcoming projects, too. A film called Exit West about migration, a movie about Tenzing Norgay, who climbed Everest, and more White House-oriented content.
It's a way to maintain influence and shape the public conversation long, long after leaving office.
For sure. And it's important to note, this isn't just a tactic on one side of the aisle. We have to look at Melania Trump's recent project as well.
The documentary that's simply titled Melania.
That's the one. It focuses entirely on her time as First Lady.
I saw the trailer for that. It looked very glossy, very produced.
Glamorous propaganda is how the critics in the source material described it. And it features her staff, her chief of staff, Haley Harrison, her interior designer. It uses the aesthetics of high fashion and luxury to tell its story.
To what end? What's the goal?
To cement a political legacy. To control the narrative of her time in the White House. It's about creating a visual archive that portrays her tenure in a specific, curated, and very flattering light.
So whether we're talking about the Obamas on Netflix or Melania's documentary, the significance is the same, isn't it?
I think so.
Political figures are no longer just public servants or policymakers.
They are global media icons. They have become brands, and they are utilizing the entire machinery of the entertainment industry to build and maintain their influence.
And when you combine that celebrity-style influence with the repeal of the Smith-Mundt Act and the massive DoD ad budgets,
you realize we are just swimming in a sea of influence that is often funded directly or indirectly by the state or by the political elite.
And the really scary part is we often don't even know where the money is actually going, which is a perfect transition to Section 5, the black hole of transparency.
This is a huge problem.
You said earlier we spend $1.5 billion a year. Do we actually know who gets those checks?
Not always. Not by a long shot. There is a massive reporting gap. The Open the Books report highlights what they call this data void.
A data void?
You might see a government contract that lists a big ad agency as the recipient of, say, $100 million. But that agency is just a middleman.
They're just a pass-through.
They are. So we know Agency X got $100 million. But we don't know if they turned around and spent that money on TV commercials or billboards or
something else.
Or unspecified digital media. That is a very common line item you see in these contracts. And that is basically a code word.
For what?
For big tech.
So Google and Facebook.
Primarily. The evidence suggests a massive, massive shift in government ad spending towards social media.
Are there numbers on that?
There are some, but it's hard to get a full picture.
Yep.
For example, one source noted that in San Francisco, at the city level, 40% of reported discretionary ad spending went to search and social media companies.
40%.
The U.S. Army has publicly stated it's shifted significant recruitment budgets to digital platforms like Twitch and YouTube. Another report showed that the state of Maryland's spending with Google tripled since 2018.
So let me just trace the path of the money here. Taxpayer money is flowing from the U.S. Treasury through a third-party ad agency and directly into the pockets of Silicon Valley giants.
Correct. We are feeding the algorithms. Our tax dollars are funding the business model of these tech monopolies.
And this raises a huge policy question, one that gets brought up a lot. It's often called the rebuild local news argument.
It's a very compelling argument.
The basic idea is that local news is dying. Right? Local newspapers are shutting down all over the country.
Every week, it seems. And one of the primary reasons is that their traditional ad revenue has completely dried up. It's all gone to Google and Facebook.
So the argument is, if the federal government is going to spend $1.5 billion on advertising anyway,
why not direct that spend to local newspapers and media outlets?
Instead of giving it to Mark Zuckerberg, Give it to the Des Moines Register or the Tallahassee Democrat or your local Gazette.
Exactly. The idea is to move the money from these opaque algorithms and put it toward community sustainability. You keep local journalists employed, and you get your message out.
Is there any precedent for this? Is anyone actually doing it?
Yes. New York City has an initiative called Ad Boost that does this. Canada has passed national laws to try and make tech platforms pay for news. And actually, there was a small win here recently.
Oh.
A 2024 law now mandates that HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, must set aside a certain portion of its public health ad spending specifically for small and rural community media outlets.
That seems like a total win-win. You get the public health message out to hard-to-reach communities, and you support struggling local journalism at the same time.
It could be a model for the future, but right now, the vast majority of that federal money is still disappearing into that digital black hole.
Okay.
And that lack of transparency makes it so hard to know if the money is being used effectively or if it's just fueling the tech monopolies.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time talking about the government's massive resources, its megaphone. Now let's flip the script. Let's talk about the other side of the equation. Section 6. The imbalance of power. The state versus the citizen.
This is where the rubber really meets the road. We've established that the government has a $1.5 billion megaphone. What does the average citizen have to compete with that?
A cardboard sign and a Twitter account. Maybe a TikTok account now.
Pretty much. And the cost of just using that cardboard sign effectively is going up. The sources we looked at analyze what they call the political economy of mobilization.
What does it mean?
It means it is becoming incredibly expensive to dissent. It costs a lot of money to protest.
Really? Give me some numbers. How much could it possibly cost?
Well, the sources estimate that organizing a protest of, say, 10,000 people in a major city like Manhattan costs about $150,000.
150 grand for what? People just show up, right?
Not if you want it to be effective and safe. You need to pay for stages, sound systems, permits from the city, liability insurance. You can't just show up with a bullhorn anymore. Not for a large-scale event. You need infrastructure.
So this is the activist's dilemma. The barrier to entry for effective mass protest is becoming financialized. You need big donors just to be heard.
Exactly. And then there is the other side of this coin. Something the sources call the Luigi effect.
The Luigi effect.
It refers to a specific incident of high-profile violence against a corporate executive, in this case, the CEO of United Healthcare. And that incident drove up the cost of private security massively.
How much are we talking?
Elite-level personal protection now costs around $250 per hour per agent.
So the elites are armoring up.
They are creating a security gap. The wealthy and the powerful can afford to hire their own private armies to protect them from public anger. The average citizen obviously cannot.
And at the same time that it's getting more expensive to protest, the legal penalties for protesting are increasing.
Dramatically. I'm glad you brought that up. I've been reading about these critical infrastructure laws.
Yes. New laws have been passed in many states that designate things like fossil fuel pipelines or power plants as critical infrastructure.
Which sounds reasonable on the surface, right? We want to protect those things.
But what it actually does is allow for extreme felony-level charges and massive fines for protests that happen near those sites.
So if you chain yourself to a pipeline to protest climate change, you aren't just getting a misdemeanor trespassing charge anymore, like you might have 20 years ago.
No, you might be facing a felony conviction and financial ruin. The fines are life-altering.
And the sources argue that the impact is specifically designed to incapacitate disobedient citizens. If you are a young activist or part of an indigenous group that lacks capital, these fines can effectively remove you from the playing field entirely.
It's an economic war on dissent.
In a way, yes. And there is a final cruel twist to all of this. There's a backlash element, too.
What do you mean?
Multiple studies have shown that extreme protest actions, things like blocking major highways or disrupting a sporting event, often cause a backlash where the general public actually starts to support the opponent of the protest more.
So if I block traffic to protest climate change, people who are stuck in that traffic might get so annoyed with me that they actually side with the oil companies.
Or at least they side against you. They see you as the problem, not the issue you're trying to highlight. It creates this impossible catch-22 for activists.
You need to be disruptive to be heard over the government's billion-dollar megaphone and the media noise.
But if you are too disruptive, you alienate the public and you could face financial ruin and jail time.
It paints a pretty bleak picture of the marketplace of ideas. It doesn't sound like a free market. It sounds like a monopoly.
It is certainly a distorted market. On one side, you have the government with a well-funded, professionally staffed, and now legalized propaganda machine, thanks to the repeal of Smith-Mundt and that army of PAOs.
On the other side.
You have the citizen facing rising costs of entry just to speak and increasing legal and financial risks for speaking too loudly.
So let's try to summarize this beast of a topic. It's a lot to take in.
It is.
We started with the simple, familiar recruitment ads for the Army.
The most visible part of the iceberg. $1 billion tip.
We moved from there to the Smith-Mundt Act and the quiet repeal of the ban on domestic propaganda.
The moment the floodgates were open for the fire hose of falsehood.
Then we talked about the pivot to Hollywood, these Netflix deals and high-end documentaries as the new form of statecraft.
Soft power turned inward, using culture to shape politics.
And we ended with this sobering look at the black hole of digital spending and the crushing costs of citizen activism.
It's a system where, more and more, the one with the biggest budget and the loudest megaphone wins the information war.
So let's bring it all home. What does this all mean? Why should our listener, who's maybe just driving to work right now or doing the dishes, why should they care about PAOs and Smith-Mundts and VNRs?
Because I think at a very deep level, we all like to believe that our opinions are our own.
Of course.
We like to think that we look at the facts, we use our reason, and we come to a rational conclusion about the world. But what this deep dive really shows is that the government is not a neutral arbiter of facts. It is not a referee.
It's player in the game. And it has cheat codes.
That's a great way to put it. It is an active, aggressive participant in the media landscape. So when you see a truthful but incomplete narrative about a war or a public health crisis or a new piece of legislation, you have to ask yourself, is this the whole story?
Or is this the story that $1.5 billion bought?
Precisely. It challenges us to be much more critical consumers of every single piece of information we encounter.
It means we have to look for the attribution. We have to constantly ask, who is funding the message? Who benefits from me believing this?
We do. And we have to realize that in this modern information war, your attention is the territory. It's the ground they are all fighting over.
I want to leave everyone with a final thought to mull over, something to take with you. We've talked about the money, the laws, the movies, but here's the really provocative question that comes out of all this for me.
Okay.
If the government is the second largest PR firm in the world, and they are now legally allowed to target you with narratives that are technically true but strategically curated and incomplete, how do you know if your latest political opinion, that thing you were arguing about with your family at dinner last night, was formed by your own critical thinking? Or was it just the return on investment for a billion-dollar taxpayer-funded campaign?
That is the question that should keep us all up at night.
Keep questioning the source, everyone. We'll see you on the next deep dive.
Take care.